We need someone more digitally intuitive, quicker. Kevin Ashford, my 34-year-old director, leaned back in his chair like he'd just delivered wisdom instead of insult. You're saying I'm too old? I'm saying the industry is evolving. We need fresh perspectives, people who grew up with technology, not people who learned it along the way. I stared at him. 17 years. I'd given North Star Financial Services 17 years of my life, built their infrastructure from dial-up connections to cloud integration, maintained 99.94% uptime across systems that processed $2.3 billion in payroll transactions annually. And this kid, this literal kid who'd been promoted 6 months ago because he played golf with the right executives, was telling me I wasn't digitally intuitive. The systems I manage have experienced 7 minutes of unplanned downtime in 17 years. 7 minutes! Historical performance isn't predictive of future capability. He definitely read that in a management book. We're bringing in someone with modern certifications, someone who understands where technology is heading. And where is that exactly? That's not your concern anymore, Teresa. He slid a folder across the desk. Severance package. Quite generous, actually. HR will handle the details. I looked at the folder. Didn't open it. Effective when? Immediately. We'll have IT escort you. I know the process, Kevin. I wrote the process. I stood up, checked my watch. 4:52 p.m. I'll clear my desk and be gone by 5. That's surprisingly cooperative. I've been doing this a long time. I know when a decision is final. I walked to my office, collected 17 years of personal items into a single cardboard box. Photos of my husband, Eduardo, a coffee mug from our 20th anniversary trip, a small cactus that survived longer than most of my colleagues. At 4:58 p.m., I handed my badge to the security guard who couldn't meet my eyes. I'm sorry, Mrs. Campos. You didn't deserve this. No, I didn't. I picked up my box. But the building deserves what's coming even less. He looked confused. I didn't explain. By the time I reached my car, my phone was already lighting up. I ignored it, started driving, turned on music I hadn't listened to in years. Eduardo was waiting when I got home. You're early, and you have a box. They let me go. Too old, not digitally intuitive. His expression shifted from surprise to anger to something approaching amusement. They have no idea what they've done, do they? Not yet. At 6:45 p.m., my phone showed 82 missed calls, texts flooding in, voicemails stacking up. I poured a glass of wine and watched the notifications pile higher. Aren't you going to answer? Eduardo asked. I'm not their employee anymore. I'm not their problem anymore. I raised my glass to digital intuition, to consequences. Before I continue with what happened next and what that payroll crash actually cost them, let me pause here. If you've ever been dismissed for your age by someone half as competent, if you've ever watched decades of expertise get replaced by buzzwords, if you've ever been told you're obsolete by people who couldn't survive a week without what you built, this one's going to hit close. We are pushing toward 1,000 subscribers. Every person who joins helps these experiences reach more people dealing with age discrimination right now. More people being told they're too old for jobs they invented. More people who deserve to know that sometimes karma arrives in 107 minutes. Hit that subscribe button. Become part of this community. Because what happened to North Star Financial between 4:58 p.m. and midnight is the kind of chaos that only arrogance creates. Let me explain what 99.94% uptime actually requires, and what happens when the person maintaining it walks away. My name is Teresa Campos. I was 49 when Kevin Ashford decided experience was a liability. Married to Eduardo for 23 years, no kids by choice, we'd decided early that careers and each other were enough. a decision I'd never regretted, especially during the 17 years of on-call nights and emergency weekend fixes that kept North Star running. I'd started in IT when women in technology were still rare enough to be newsworthy, learned programming on systems that no longer exist, watched the industry transform from mainframes to PCs to mobile to cloud. Every transformation required learning, adapting, evolving. The idea that I wasn't digitally intuitive was absurd. I'd been digital before Kevin Ashford was born. North Star Financial Services was a payroll processing company. We handled direct deposits, tax withholdings, benefits administration, and compliance reporting for over 8,000 business clients. 2 million workers relied on our systems to get paid accurately and on time. I'd built that reliability personally. When I joined, North Star was a mid-size operation with decent systems and frequent outages. The previous infrastructure manager had retired, leaving behind undocumented configurations and single points of failure everywhere. I spent the first 3 years mapping every dependency, documenting every process, building redundancy into every critical pathway. I created monitoring systems that caught problems before they became outages. I established maintenance windows that minimize disruption. And I achieved 99.94% uptime. 7 minutes of unplanned downtime in 17 years. 7 minutes out of nearly 9 million total minutes, a number that seemed impossible until you understood how much work went into making it look effortless. But effortless was the problem. Nobody noticed the servers that didn't crash. Nobody celebrated the payrolls that processed perfectly. Nobody recognized the disasters prevented by constant vigilance. They only noticed the cost, my salary, my benefits, the overhead that Kevin Ashford had been brought in to eliminate. He'd risen through the company on charm and golf games, not technical competence. When the previous director retired, Kevin saw an opportunity to prove himself by modernizing the department. Modernizing, in his mind, meant replacing expensive, experienced people with cheaper, inexperienced ones. We can outsource infrastructure management for half the cost, he'd argued in budget meetings. These legacy employees are holding us back. Legacy employees, that's what he called us, the people who'd built everything he was trying to optimize. I'd tried warning him, explained that our systems weren't standard configurations that any contractor could manage, that 17 years of customization had created dependencies that only I fully understood, that the documentation, while thorough, couldn't capture the institutional knowledge in my head. He didn't listen. He never listened. Everything can be documented, everything can be transferred. You're not as irreplaceable as you think, Teresa. So I documented, I transferred, I wrote procedure manuals that filled 3 binders, and I waited for him to make his move.
The payroll processing system at North Star wasn't simple. It wasn't an off-the-shelf application you could install and forget. It was 17 years of accumulated customization, integration, and institutional compromise. Patches built on patches, workarounds that had become permanent solutions, dependencies that existed because they'd always existed. I knew every quirk, every fragile connection, every process that would break if you looked at it wrong. The most critical was the end-of-day batch processing sequence. Every weekday at 5:30 p.m., the system initiated a cascade of jobs that prepared payroll data for the next day's processing. Database synchronization, file transfers, validation checks, error correction routines. The sequence took approximately 45 minutes to complete. During that time, certain manual interventions were sometimes necessary. Database locks that needed releasing, job queues that occasionally stalled, checkpoints that required verification. I'd monitored this process every weekday evening for 17 years, from home mostly,
a quick check at 5:30, another at 6, a final verification at 6:15 before the batch jobs completed. It was so routine that I barely thought about it anymore. Just another part of my day. Wine at 6 while I watched the monitoring dashboard, dinner at 6:30 after confirming everything was green. Kevin didn't know about this routine, didn't know it existed, because I'd made it look effortless. The batch processing system had dependencies on service accounts that I'd configured, maintenance routines that I'd scheduled, monitoring alerts that were routed to my personal email because the official channels were too slow. When I walked out at 4:58 p.m., all of that walked out with me. At 5:30 p.m., the batch processing began, automatically, just like every other day. At 5:47 p.m., the first database lock occurred, a normal event that happened maybe twice a month. Usually, I'd release it remotely with a quick command. Takes 30 seconds. Nobody released it. At 6:02 p.m., cascading job failures began. The locked database prevented subsequent processes from completing. Jobs started timing out, error queues started filling. At 6:23 p.m., the payroll processing engine entered a failure state. Automatic recovery procedures initiated, procedures that required manual verification I wasn't there to provide. At 6:38 p.m., the entire batch processing system crashed. At 6:45 p.m., when I checked my phone for the first time since leaving, the operations center had been calling continuously for nearly an hour. 82 missed calls from Kevin, from the night shift supervisor, from the CTO, from numbers I didn't recognize but could guess. I didn't call back. I finished my wine instead. The calls continued through the evening. At 7:30 p.m., Kevin's number appeared again. This time, I answered. Teresa, thank God. We have a critical situation. The payroll batch processing has crashed. Yes, I noticed the missed calls. We need you to come back immediately. Just for tonight, we'll pay whatever overtime you want. Kevin, I don't work for North Star anymore. You fired me this afternoon, remember? Too old, not digitally intuitive. This is an emergency. 2 million people are supposed to get paid tomorrow morning. That sounds like a problem for someone more digitally intuitive than me. Silence. Teresa, please, I'm begging you. You had 17 years of my expertise available to you. You chose to eliminate it. I'm not your backup plan anymore. We'll give you your job back. Pretend today never happened. You publicly terminated me for being too old. You had security escort me out. You told me the industry had passed me by. I took another sip of wine. I don't want my job back. I want to enjoy my evening. The CTO is going to call you. He's welcome to call. I'm not answering. What do you want? Name your price, consulting fees, whatever. I want to have dinner with my husband. I want to sleep well. I want to wake up tomorrow without checking server status at 3 a.m. for the first time in 17 years. Teresa. Good night, Kevin. Good luck. I hung up. The CTO did call. I didn't answer. The CEO's assistant called. I didn't answer. An emergency conference bridge number showed up in my texts with increasingly desperate language. I turned off my phone. Eduardo made pasta. We watched a movie we'd been meaning to see for months. I went to bed at 10 p.m. without knowing whether any servers were functional. It felt revolutionary. The next morning, my phone showed 247 missed calls and over 500 text messages. Headlines were appearing on financial news sites. North Star Financial Services experiences major outage. 2 million workers may face delayed paychecks. Payroll processor scrambles to restore systems. I made coffee and read them all with detached interest. At 9 a.m., an attorney I'd retained months earlier, just in case, called with news. They want to negotiate, urgently. The outage is ongoing, and they've realized they can't fix it without you. How ongoing? They've been working all night, called in contractors, brought back retired employees from other departments. Nobody can figure out your configurations. My documentation was thorough. Documentation isn't experience. You knew that. That's why you hired me months ago. What are they offering? They're not offering yet. They're requesting a meeting, today, whenever you're available. I looked at my coffee, at Eduardo reading in the sunlight, at the peaceful morning I'd earned. Tell them 2 p.m. at your office, not theirs.
The meeting was illuminating. Kevin Ashford wasn't there. Neither was anyone from HR. Just the CTO, a man named Richard Brennan, and Northstar's general counsel. They both looked like they hadn't slept. "Mrs. Campos, thank you for coming. I'm here to listen. I'm not guaranteeing anything else." Richard ran his hands through his hair, a nervous gesture I'd seen 1,000 times during crisis meetings. "The payroll system is still down. We've been working for 18 hours straight. The contractors we brought in can't interpret your documentation. The configurations don't match any standard patterns they recognize. Because they're not standard, they're 17 years of customization for Northstar's specific requirements. We understand that now. Do you? Because yesterday your department head told me I was too old and the company needed people more digitally intuitive." Richard winced. Kevin's comments were inappropriate and do not reflect company values. They reflect Kevin's values, and Kevin runs the department. Kevin has been placed on administrative leave pending a full review of his termination decisions. I raised an eyebrow. That happened fast. The board held an emergency session at 6 a.m. When they learned that our 17-year infrastructure manager was terminated hours before a catastrophic system failure, they had questions. Many questions. Questions Kevin couldn't answer? Questions Kevin couldn't even understand. Richard leaned forward. "Mrs. Campos, Teresa, we need you back. Not as an employee, we understand that bridge may be burned, but as a consultant. Emergency engagement, whatever it takes to restore functionality. What's the current status? Approximately 1.8 million workers will not receive their scheduled direct deposits today. We're facing breach of service agreements with over 3,000 client companies. The financial exposure is significant." How significant? Preliminary estimates suggest $47 million in penalties, compensation, and remediation costs, growing hourly. I processed that number, $47 million, because Kevin Ashford decided I was too old. "What's your offer?" Richard slid a folder across the table. "Emergency consulting engagement, $2,500 per hour, minimum 80-hour commitment, additional bonuses based on restoration timeline. That's $200,000 minimum, plus the bonus structure. If you can restore full functionality within 72 hours, there's a $150,000 completion bonus. $350,000 to fix systems I'd maintained for $95,000 a year. I have conditions beyond compensation. Name them. Kevin Ashford is terminated, not administrative leave, terminated, with documentation that he was removed for age discrimination and gross mismanagement." Richard glanced at the general counsel, who nodded slightly. "The board has already authorized that outcome. Second, I receive a formal written acknowledgement that my termination was wrongful, filed with appropriate agencies, usable in any future proceedings. That's legally complex. So was what you did to me. Take it or leave it." More glances, more nods. "Agreed. Third, Any contractor or replacement you eventually hire works under my supervision for a minimum of 6 months. I train them properly. I verify they're actually capable. No more decisions made by people who don't understand what they're deciding. Reasonable. Then we have a deal. I stood. I'll need immediate access to all systems. Someone meets me at the building in 1 hour with full credentials restored. You're starting now? You're bleeding $200,000 per hour in penalties. I'm expensive, but I'm cheaper than delay.
Fixing the system took 31 hours. Not because it was complicated. I dealt with worse failures before, but because 18 hours of panicked intervention by unqualified contractors had created new problems on top of the original crash. They'd tried to restart services without understanding dependencies. They'd modified configurations, trying to force connections. They'd corrupted backup files, attempting recovery procedures they didn't understand. I spent the first 8 hours undoing their damage, then another 12 hours restoring proper functionality, then 11 hours verifying everything, running test transactions and ensuring the batch processing would work correctly the following evening. At 4 a.m. on the second day, payroll processing completed successfully. 1.6 million workers received delayed direct deposits by noon. The remaining 200,000 required manual intervention over the following week, but the crisis was contained. The completion bonus hit my account 3 days later, $350,000 total for 31 hours of work, more than I'd earned in 3 years as an employee. Eduardo laughed when I showed him the bank notification. They're paying you more for 2 days of consulting than for 3 years of employment? That's the premium for expertise they should have valued when they had it. Any regrets about not going back permanently? None. I fixed their immediate crisis, but I'm not spending another decade making magic look routine for people who don't appreciate it. Kevin Ashford's termination became public the following week. Industry publications picked up the story. Age discrimination lawsuit looms as payroll giant faces $47 million in outage costs. The lawsuit was filed a month later, not by me, by the terminated employee class action that formed once other workers learned what had happened. Kevin's modernization efforts had pushed out 17 employees over 40 years old in the previous 6 months. All of them were invited to join the action. I consulted for North Star for 3 more months, trained their replacement team, actual qualified engineers this time, documented every configuration in excruciating detail, built monitoring systems that even average administrators could interpret. Then I walked away, permanently this time. Richard Brennan tried to convince me to stay. "We've changed, Teresa. The board understands now. We'd be honored to have you back permanently." "You'd be honored to have me back because you almost collapsed without me. That's not appreciation, that's fear." Isn't fear a form of appreciation? It's a form of desperation, and I've spent 17 years being essential to desperate people. I'd rather be valuable to myself for a while. He didn't argue. He knew I was right.
Here's what I want you to absorb from my experience. The work that looks effortless is usually the most essential. The systems that never crash are maintained by people who never rest. The reliability everyone depends on exists because someone sacrificed their nights, weekends, and peace of mind to create it. Kevin Ashford saw my salary and saw expense. He didn't see the 2 a.m. alerts I responded to, the vacation days I worked through, the 17 years of accumulated expertise that made 99.94% uptime possible. He saw too old. He saw not digitally intuitive. He didn't see the $47 million in losses that happened when I walked out the door. If you're maintaining systems right now that everyone takes for granted, if you're the invisible person who keeps everything running,
If you've been told your experience is obsolete by people who couldn't do your job for a single day, your time is coming. Not as revenge, as recognition. The quarterly review will happen. The critical deadline will arrive. The system will need attention from someone who actually understands it. And when they call, and they will call, you'll have choices they never anticipated. I made $350,000 in 2 days, not because I'm greedy, because that's what they were willing to pay when they finally understood my actual value, when the magic stopped looking effortless, when the consequences of dismissing expertise became impossible to ignore. Eduardo and I took a trip after the consulting engagement ended. 3 weeks in Portugal. No phones, no alerts, no 2 a.m. wake-ups. "What are you going to do next?" he asked one evening, watching the sunset over Lisbon. "Whatever I want, for the first time in 17 years. That sounds uncertain. It sounds free. I turned 50 last month, the age Kevin Ashford thought made me obsolete, the age that supposedly meant I couldn't understand modern technology. I spent my birthday consulting for a tech startup run by 20-somethings who sought me out specifically because of my experience, because they'd heard about North Star, because they understood that too old often means irreplaceable. "How do you know so much about systems that weren't invented when you started?" one of them asked after a moment of stunning me. "Because I learned how to learn, because I adapted through every technology shift for 3 decades. Because intuition isn't about age, it's about attention." He nodded, understanding what Kevin never could. If you've made it this far, thank you, genuinely. This experience taught me that value doesn't disappear just because someone decides not to see it. We're pushing toward 1,000 subscribers. Every person who joins helps these experiences reach more people being dismissed for their age right now, more people being told they're obsolete, more people who need to know that the 82 missed calls are coming eventually. Hit that subscribe button, share this with someone whose experience is being ignored, someone being pushed out for younger replacements, someone who needs to know that 99.94% uptime isn't accidental. Tell them about Kevin Ashford. Tell them about the 4:58 p.m. walkout. Tell them about the $350,000 consulting fee. Tell them that too old sometimes means too essential to replace. Drop a comment with your experience, the systems you maintain invisibly, the expertise nobody recognizes, the moment someone finally understood what you actually do. I read every single one, usually over morning coffee, without checking server status, enjoying the freedom I earned. You're not obsolete, you're essential. We're building something meaningful here. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. And remember, when someone calls you too old, make sure their payroll system knows exactly who was keeping it running. The 82 missed calls will explain everything they should have understood.